Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is the third scenario from A Night at the Opera, music from A Darkened Room, for Delta Green the role-playing game by Arcdream Publishing. Historically, music from A Darkened Room was originally released as a free scenario in 2012 and has been updated to the present day and illustrated by the author Dennis DeTwiller for inclusion here. Music from A Darkened Room starts with the premise that places, like people, can go bad, and one such place is 1206 Spooner Avenue. In the last 50 years, 18 people have died there under various circumstances, and you can feel it in the air when you walk in. Spooner Avenue is a quiet street in Meadowbrook, New Jersey. It was built in 1907 and is fairly unremarkable. The neighbours are predominantly elderly retirees, and they all know about the death at 1206. The deaths began around 1960 with the murder-suicide of Douglas and Margaret Crease, and over time, as the bodies piled up, the house became evil. Since the death of the Creases, 16 more people have died here. They're a mixture of suicides, accidents and murders. Nobody since the Creases have lasted longer than a month, and yet, despite all this, the house continues to be sold whenever it comes on the market. The house is avoided and shunned by neighbours as they know the house is alive. The operation takes place in late 2017 and the agents are assigned Operation Iago to determine what caused veteran Delta Green agent, FBI Special Agent Arthur Donnelly, to kill himself in the house. They are to focus attention on whether 1206 Spooner Avenue represents an ongoing threat to the public. It is known that Donnelly went to 1206 2 weeks earlier without informing Delta Green, and nobody knows why. He was reported missing by his wife as he left his cell phone behind. Two agents from the Trenton office tracked his phone's recent movements and found a number of unexplained visits to 1206. The next day, Donnelly was found dead in the master bedroom with his throat cleanly cut as if with a straight razor. Significantly, Donnelly's suicide was exactly the same as Yamila Isari's suicide 16 months earlier. Delta Green, through their agents in the FBI, made sure that the official investigation ended there, with Donnelly's noted disposition for being depressive, obsessive and overwhelmed by stress adding to this. It was ruled that he went to the house, suffered a breakdown and killed himself. The tragedy was reported in the local newspaper, but nobody, the neighbours, the local police or the FBI, want this to go mainstream. The agent's contact informs them that 1206 has been suspected in the past of influencing people's behaviour and should be taken seriously. There are two nearby assets that can assist with research, an antique dealer, Elizabeth Tucker, and a parapsychologist, Emile Yarrow, although they should be told as little as possible. They're also given a battered old cell phone for limited use that doesn't send metadata. 1206 was built in 1907 by Michael Wheeler, a 32-year-old mason who brought his invalid wife Isabel Wheeler here to die. They were married in 1905, but Isabel was struck down with an unknown ailment that robbed her of the use of her legs and racked her with spasms and convulsions. Michael was killed when he was struck on the head by a piece of marble in 1910. He left a significant amount of money for his wife, who remained at the house for a further 46 years. In 1926, Isabel's pain was lifted when she took to living with an old Italian woman, Adele Di Vitello, known by neighbours as the Crone. Suspected of practicing witchcraft while working as a seamstress at a nearby sanitarium, she ended up meeting Isabel and moving in with her. For the first time in 20 years, Isabel could walk and live life normally. Strange things were happening. Animals were disappearing in the neighbourhood and foreign men were showing up at the house. A wasting disease seemed to mysteriously affect those people who confronted the Crone and her associates, and people eventually steered clear. The truth is, Di Vitello actually was practicing witchcraft. By the time she vanished in 1955, she looked over 100 years old. In actuality, she was far older. She had signed her life away to L'Uomo Nero, the Black Man, in the summer of 1800 at age 18. She wheedled her way into Spooner Avenue and gained control over Isabel by taking away her pain and suffering. She removed her suffering and put it behind the mirrors in the house, restoring her form to physical health. For 30 years, the Crone lived there, and in 1940 she consecrated the property in the name of Nai Ar Lath Otep, the secret name of the Dark Man, spending 15 years casting the rituals. This culminated in 1955 when L'Uomo Nero himself appeared. Isabel refused to join him and the next day awoke to the Crone gone and slowly wasted away over the next year. She died in 1956, aged 69. Isabel's pained spirit still lives in the mirrors in the house. However, after the further deaths, she is not alone. The players are also given information on a green box that they can recover. Should they jump through the requisite hoops to access it, they find, amongst other things, various pieces of furniture, weapons and ammunition, a few fake identities that Donnelly used, and a crumbling coffin that contains the remains of Anton Touré. Accompanying the equipment are some of Donnelly's notes that indicate that 1206 had been on his mind for some years. He was local to the area, and Amanda Braintree's death a few years ago piqued his interest. He visited it and sensed the cold unnatural presence. He sent word to Delta Green, but they never replied. He tried to discourage Yamila Isari from buying the house, but she could not be convinced. The notes indicate a man bent on uncovering the secret of 1206. The scenario then provides you with a list of leads that the agents can follow up on, such as the county seat, asking about town and what they can uncover by simply digging through news archives. It also gives hints on what the handler should do if players flash their badges about a bit too much. This is followed by a list of all of the people that died in the house, and it gives us details on most of them with dates and methods. We're also provided with a list of those that had ties to the house who survived, providing their story as well as information that they can give. They can speak to the local coroner, who will only talk to the agent about the death at the say-so of the local chief of police, but they can provide some information on the state that Donnelly and Isari's bodies were found in. They had identical throat cuts with the same blood spray pattern. There are photos of the scene, and observant agents will be able to spot that the shape of the spray on the mirror makes it look like someone was standing there. It details everything that can be discovered via the local news archives, and it also details 2 pieces of furniture that remain in the area that were sold via estate sales over the years, which their friendly Elizabeth Tucker can locate. One of them is an unusual table that, upon inspection, is found to be hollow. Inside can be found a bronze sacrificial knife used to perform the Convoci l'uomo nero ritual, more on that later, a bronze bowl clotted with ancient blood that is also used for the ritual, and a book, Isabel Wheeler's diary. This details everything from 1927 to 1955, including Isabel's pact with the crone, the consecration of the property, and the Dark Man's appearance. It goes into great detail about the ritual. There's also a piano and an armoire that has the strange property of allowing anybody who steps inside it and shuts the door who has a power of 15 or more to hear the incantation of the Convoci l'uomo nero ritual, all in Italian. We have notes on speaking to the neighbours and what they can reveal, and then it goes on to the house itself. As previously stated, it's fairly unremarkable. A small house with high ceilings, with a room added above the garage and ivy climbing the north face of the building. It was renovated sometime in the 1970s and is still decorated with Yamila Isari's belongings and has the tape that surrounded Donnelly's body still on the floor. We then have a section on running the house itself. 1206 fueled by the anger and hatred of the beings trapped inside it, and they draw power from the fear and despair of those who visit. Isabel Wheeler has been collecting souls to inhabit the dark world behind the mirrors. Those spirits live in a horrible half-life, either repeating their last moments over and over or doing their best to lure the living to their deaths. The house wants nothing more than self-preservation and the gathering of willpower points from visitors. It is a battery for sorrow. Above that, the house is intelligent. It will manipulate visitors and their emotions. It can make telephone calls and mimic people in an uncanny way. Those with a power of 16 or above, or with an art or psychotherapy of 50% or greater, have an uncomfortable feeling of being watched in the house at all times. Once the agents have visited the house, it will try its best to get them to come back. It can send them texts, emails, and call them. Once the agents uncover its mimicry, it will play with them, letting them speak with the dead that are trapped there. We have some game rules on how the house uses its powers of consumption, obsession, and possession. The house can literally possess people and cause them to do unspeakable things. Additionally, anything in the house with a reflective surface can be used by Isabel to interact with the physical world. So, as we move on, it goes into the manifestations that the house can give. Each room has things that happen that depend on the willpower score of the agent. The higher the score, the more subtle it is. For example, when entering the foyer, a high willpower will hear a piano playing Moonlight Sonata, which stops as soon as the door is opened. A lower willpower will hear the music continuing throughout the house. Details like this are given for each room, with the instructions for the DM to not drop all of the manifestations at once. As the agent's willpower is whittled down by the house, the manifestations become more horrific and end up being physically dangerous. Ultimately, the players need to overcome the house and figure out a way of stopping it for good, or at least as for good as you can get in the grim world of Delta Green. The issue is that players won't get all of the clues on how to stop the house without experiencing it at its worst. For example, things like Yamila's diary can only be found by digging about. If the house can subtly wear down on their willpower to the point where they commit suicide, then all the better, as it has to spend power points in order to possess someone. Burning the house down won't work, as the earth itself is consecrated to the Dark Man, and someone will just end up being drawn to it and rebuilding. Removing the consecration by performing the Convoci l'uomo nero ritual will work, however, that requires a human sacrifice, and it's really down to whether the agent could live with what they've done. Also, an elder sign can be used to smash the mirrors in the house, which dissipates the feeling of possession, causing it to feel like a normal house again. This will, however, destroy the elder sign. It then follows with the details of the ritual to summon and dismiss the Dark Man, which is sanity shredding in itself. The win condition here is successfully lifting the consecration. The deaths will continue otherwise. Finally, we have the stats for some of the more important NPC characters. Music from a Darkened Room is a fine example of how to do a semblance of a haunted house scenario in Delta Green. It has the feeling about it of a scenario that has had many revisions and has been fine-tuned for its ultimate official release. The history of the house is fascinatingly portrayed, and I feel the agents will have as much fun finding out what has come before as much as going to the house itself. The house is described as small, but having 4 bedrooms, a garage and a den and the like doesn't make it feel small. It's evocatively described in great detail, and the reasons behind how and why the house does what it does is excellently realised. My only issue here is how the horror is portrayed. The kind of horror that is shown in haunted houses is, at least to me, much more effective when it's subtle. As a player, hearing a piano playing in a room that stops when the door is opened is unnerving, and this is the atmosphere that the house has, but I do feel that some of the shock horror is pretty heavy-handed at times. Don't get me wrong, I do appreciate that the house is dedicated to Nyarlathotep, and there are certain expectations surrounding that, but the players don't know that. All they know at first is that it is the house where people seem to go to die. If you're smart in how you handle the various manifestations as a keeper in Music from the Darkened Room, you could create a scenario that will stick in your players' memories for a long time to come, as it preys on the very primal fear of the unknown. Dennis the Twiller, as seems to be the norm for him, has been very clever with the protagonist here. How do you fight a literal house? It's bricks and mortar, and should hopefully have your players thinking outside the box to defeat an enemy that only shows itself when it has the upper hand. I give Music from the Darkened Room an 8 out of 10. The next review in this series will be Extremophilia, so until then, bud out.